So the first thing that I've done is I've signed up for a MailChimp account, and it has a demo user, that kind of thing set up. We have one contact, and I've already established API keys. And if you don't know how to get that inside of MailChimp, once you have an account, just go to your account and then go to extras and API keys. And further down the page, you'll be able to get that information. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to be sharing the key necessarily, or kind of how to sign up for MailChimp, since that's a fairly straightforward process. So once we have MailChimp set up, we will do MailChimp API docs. Like I said, we're going to be doing this how you might. So I'm taking advantage of Google quite a bit during this process. So I'll go here to developer, get started, and they kind of walk through what you need to know about your API. So this is where you would move along through. And again, the objective of this live stream is to look at integrating a MailChimp subscription system into a WordPress front end and back end. So the objective is we're going to be connecting to the MailChimp API, of course, and then using that to add subscribers on the front end. So maybe a subscription form on the website. And then we'll also be looking at potentially managing those subscribers in the back end of WordPress. So I'm going to move down here, and basically using these curl requests is how we'll connect to the API. The thing to note here is, and TypeRocket provides a curl mechanism, a little simple client that we'll be using to do this. We need to provide the correct URL. So this location is like our distribution center, I guess, or our connection type. And we'll have that in our admin here. So if I pull this up and go to audience, we'll see that I am US 19, and yours might be different. That lives in the URL. Okay, so that would be our DC here. And then anything, this could be my name, Kevin, it could be API, it could be anything. This API key bit is the thing that matters. And this is basic authentication in a curl request. So that's how we want to do that to connect. And then they have other information here about how to connect. The APIs will be JSON, so that's how we need to interact with the API when we send payloads using curl. Those endpoints, here's kind of an example path. So all this is good. Read through this getting started to get yourself set up. And then once you've done that, I'll jump over the code here so you can kind of see what I've done. I've created this MailChimp controller, and we'll get into controllers in a little bit. And then we define kind of our parameters that we can put in our WP config, and you can use environment variables if you wanted to go that far with it. But this is not a real key. This is just something that yours might look like. All right, so back to the browser here. So once we've kind of gone through getting set up and we understand that it's JSON, we're going to be using curl, all that good stuff. We want to find the API docs themselves. So I'm not really sure where that is located. Let's see. Again, just trying to do things how you might do them. So again, back to Google like we said we would do. Whoops. MailChimp API docs. Here we go, API. Jump into this one. It's taking just a second to load. Let's try this link here. Here we go. So here we're in the API documentation, and it's under members. So this is what we'll use to subscribe users to our list. And here are our URLs, and they'll be based on that root path that we saw in this getting started guide. So in the code here, the getting started guide, remember the US 19. This is our base, and then we would add to this the list ID members, for example. Okay, so that's our lists under audiences. Something to note about MailChimp is they've moved away from this idea of quote unquote lists that you would group different contacts under. So they want you to work mostly in audiences and tags, and that's how we'll approach this project. But if you're coming from past experience on MailChimp, you'll be more familiar with the lists. And that was sort of like their tagging system. And the reason for this idea of audiences within MailChimp is they want to help you reduce duplicate contacts. So then you can just tag a user multiple times to do different campaigns against them. And that's what we'll do in this tutorial. So that's kind of the MailChimp stuff. But I want to step away from this for a second and jump into code. So again, just kind of keeping that in the back of our mind, the MailChimp setup process. So what we want to do from here is set up an example contact form and build that into WordPress. And then once we understand how WordPress does this, then we can move into converting that into a MailChimp connection. So let's create a system for collecting contacts to do that. So here I have a simple view set up for TypeRocket. And if I jump over to this page, it's this page here. And this is a view using the TypeRocket template system. And so if I look at this particular install, I'm using the 2019 theme and I've configured it to work with TypeRocket. If I look under resources and views, we'll see that I have a layout, this master layout here, which gets the header and the footer and then wraps the main content for my view inside of that main div. And so whatever comes after this statement here becomes that main yielding area, which is the contact section. Okay, and then from there, that's kind of set up in these routes. So if you've used TypeRocket routes before, you would just go under your routes and then this public file here. And here's where your routes are. And what we have set up is a route to respond to GET requests. And whenever somebody goes to /contact, we'll enable the TypeRocket front end. We'll need that so our form looks nice. And then we'll just return that contact view. And so this views function here looks at our views folder and then looks for this contact view and then imports it. And then from that contact, again, we load up our master layout and then we echo out the headline contact. So following that, we have /contact, the H1 tag of contact, and there's our view. Now, we probably want to set this up as a controller, and we also want a backend for this, right? We want some sort of admin view to where when we submit contacts, or when somebody contacts us, they can go into this sort of list. So the way we can do that is we would go to our functions.php file. And in here, I've just registered a quick post type in WordPress. So it's a contact post type, has the icon of book. We set the main form, we get a form element, and then we pump out the text field and the text area field. We make sure it's admin only, and then it's featureless. Featureless simply means don't include revisions, the title field, the post content field, all that stuff that WordPress typically includes in a post type. So if I click add new contact here, we'll see that it's the post title, the post content field. It's automatically filled out with auto draft just because that's what WordPress requires. So I'm just going to fill out some information. Some content, publish that. Okay, contact has been published. Go to all contacts. Well, here we see Kevin has been added. So we have the admin working in a very simple kind of way through this form, but we want this form to kind of live on the front end. So how would we go about doing that? Well, the first thing that we're going to need is some sort of model to interact with this post type. So I'll go over to the command line here, and you'll see that I've already created this MailChimp controller, but we want to do the same thing for our post type. So we will do post contact, and then I also want to include a model for this, so I'll do -m. This will create a contact controller and model, and that'll be connected to this contact post type. So then if I go to my app folder here, under models, I'll have contact connected to the contact post type and the contact controller. Okay, and that's connected to the proper model. Now, we've been using these custom routes here that are connected to anonymous functions, but it would be much better if this was connected to our actual controller. So I'll go to the contact controller, the public function, and we'll call this contact page. And then from here, we'll enable the front end, return the view, contact. And then from our public routes, instead of doing that logic here, we can just forward this request right to our controller. Okay. I can do contact controller just to make that more straightforward. Then I'm just going to copy this particular submit for the post request side of things. We don't actually have any of that logic yet, so I'll just delete that. And then we will have a contact submit method. Okay. Now I'll just go in here, contact submit. And that should be all we need right now. So we have created a contact controller. We have the model for that contact, which is here. So we can then save data whenever it gets submitted on the front end. So all we need is this front end form. One of the things that we're going to need to do is to flash our error messages to this page whenever the submission takes place. And we need the contact form, right? So let's create the contact form first. So we'll do this. Create a form. And we don't actually want to wire this into anything. We want it to be a blank form. So if we put an empty array in here, that'll do the trick. And then we want the same essential forms that we've been using for the backend. Okay. Do a text area. Okay, so here we have a form, and let's see how it looks on the front end. I'll go back to /contact. And there's our form, nicely placed on the page. Now, TypeRocket provides a nice little way to wrap up these fields so they look a little bit better. So we can do that by essentially wrapping our fields into this method call. And I believe you can just pass them each as arguments. I don't think you have to wrap it in an array. Oh, and we need to echo out the form. Okay, now it gives us a little save button here. And we can change the text of that button by having this save method. Call it send message, refresh the page. And there we go. So our contact form's all set up. However, if we inspect this page and look at some of this information here, we'll see that we have a not. That's good. It's going to be a put request. We don't really want a put request. We want a post request. And it's resending it to the same page. So we want to make sure that this is getting sent as a post request to our correct URL. So if we go back to our routes here, this is where we create those URLs. We want to respond to the submit URL. It probably should be something like contact submit. So we want this URL to be used, and we want it to respond on a post request. So the way we do this is we go back to our view here, and we'll say to URL, contact submit, post request. I believe that's correct. Method, yep. So let's see how this turns out. Refresh the page. Our form now goes to contact submit, and the method is post. which is great. That's exactly what we want. Go back here. So we have our form set up. That's being returned from our view. And then let's just return a quick string here from this contact submit to make sure this form is working. So I'll hit submit here and we'll see that it says hi. So our submission form is working. Now we just need to grab the fields and create that contact. So I like to do things this way. Do contact. And it says contact here because my IDE imported the model. So that's pretty cleaned up. And then we'll just save the fields. And we could do this two ways. We can do tr request, and this is just going to get the request fields. Whoops, I got redirect. So we can get the fields like this and it will grab all of the fields. Or we could inject the request here in the router or in the method here, like so. And I believe that's what I want to do for this because it's going to play out nicely. But I guess to just say how it works, you could also do this and this will just automatically grab the fields from the request. So you won't need to do anything but this. Let's do this. Let's just do the simplest version. We'll actually return the contact as our thing. So this should give us pretty close to what we want. As long as, we provide the post title because WordPress requires that. So let's do Jeff here, hit send. Then we'll see that we created a contact and it returned this sort of JSON response. Admin contacts, and we have a draft post of Jeff. If I click on this guy, he didn't send any message. So we have a working contact form now. That's pretty cool. However, we want some sort of error validation, right? Let's go back to the contact form. So how are we going to get error validation in this whole process? Well, the best way to do that is to create a validator, right? And there's a few ways to do that in TypeRocket. We can do tr validator, and then we can validate some fields. So it takes this fields argument, or sorry, it takes options, which would be like our rules, and then the fields themselves. But we don't really want to go about it that way. We want to use a feature in TypeRocket called fields. So we can do that by creating this thing called fields, and we'll call them contact fields. That's correct. We hit that, and now we have contact fields. And this works a lot like requests inside of Laravel, but with a few differences. So here's our contact fields. We look at this. We have the option to have this fillables and rules. And then this will like run a validation whenever it gets injected into the controller. So the first thing we want are rules. We want to make our post title required and a post content. We want it to be a minimum of, let's say, 3 characters. Okay. And that will essentially make it required, so we don't need to mark it as required if we're doing that. And then we can, in our contact controller, instead of saving fields in this way, we can do contact fields, inject that instead. And this will return just the fields. We'll drop that in, and then it'll do validation for us if we were to call validation, which we would have to do here. Validate. However, there's no point in doing this right away because, there is a point in doing that, but the injection method kind of lets us activate that validation right when it's called within that controller. So we can actually tell our validation to run that validation immediately. So we switch this to true. and then that will validate right away. And the validation process essentially will redirect you right back to the same page if there are errors. So if I send this message, we get redirected back, but we don't get told anything. And that's because we have not enabled errors within our form. So if I go back here to the form, we want to tell it to use errors. And now we can hit send here. And then it'll say that this field is required and this one must be at least 3 characters. And so that's pretty nice. However, it'd be nice to have like that overall error message, those flash messages. So then we can do echo, I believe it is, flash messages. And then that will give us what we want entirely. There we go. Post title is required and the post content must be 3 characters. And there we have this nice little contact form on the front of our website. And we can start collecting user submissions. So that's the creation of a contact form piece, but it sure would be nice if we could connect this to MailChimp. So when somebody submits, say, an email address and some information about themselves, it gets sent right over to MailChimp. So we can do that here soon. However, I wanted to show you one last little piece of the puzzle here. So what happens when we have a successful submission? So we want to have this contact get created, but then we want to return redirect. We want to go back to where we came from, and we want to do it with a flash message. Thanks. Thanks for contacting us. Okay, so let's try to get this right this time. We'll do, and then, hi there. Send the message. Thanks for contacting us. And if we go over to the back end, go to contacts here, Jenna said something to us, and it's hi there. Okay. So that completes the contact form part of this, and now we can jump into wiring this sort of system into MailChimp. So taking a similar process, we're just going to jump over to our MailChimp controller. Leave this functions.php and this layout here. And the first thing what we're going to want to do is create a new view to put our form on. So I'll do this MailChimp. And then on our contact form, we had this layout. So we'll do that. Actually I'll grab all this stuff. We'll just modify it. And then we'll say subscribe. Flash some messages. We don't want to populate this with anything. MailChimp submit is where we want to send this one. And then instead of text, we'll call this email. And maybe we'll have text. Actually, I think MailChimp only really requires email address. So we'll just do this way. So that'll be our form. I'm going to move rather quick here. So we have a contact form. Let's create our MailChimp form. So we want that MailChimp controller. And do a subscribe page. And we'll do a post request. And we'll also listen to that subscribe page, but this one we'll just call subscribe. All right, and then in MailChimp, we'll have this subscribe and public subscribe page. return our view of MailChimp. Okay. And then we need to hit the subscribe page. So we'll go to subscribe. And here we are, subscribe. Now you'll note that the field looks kind of weird because we don't have front-end mode turned on. So we want to make sure we enable it for this particular route. Refresh the page. And there we go. Looks much better. Now we need some validation against our subscribe method. So that would be the next step in the process to this subscribe method here. So we'll create that fields piece again, and this time it'll be subscribe fields. That'll get us our fields. And then we will go into app, HTTP, fields, subscribe. And we're going to say email. Should be an email. And it is required. Okay. And that should get us our validation working. And then we'll do similar to we did with the contact option here. We will return a redirect back. And we'll say thanks for subscribing. Let's just validate that this works. So, whoops. Okay, MailChimp submit is not the URL we have wired into our MailChimp view. Is it? MailChimp submit. Maybe it's our route that's incorrect. So our route is incorrect. So we just need to make this subscribe. And we'll hit subscribe here. Oop. I have to refresh this page. Okay. Hit subscribe. Thanks for subscribing. So I've made an error somewhere in here. Email required. Rules. Oh, it did not. It's not set to run. Oh, again, part of the reason I wanted to do this live was so we could experience stuff like that together. So there we go. Email must be an email address. That's good. So there we go. We actually probably don't even need required since we have validation for email, and a blank field is not going to be an email. So then from here, we can start connecting to MailChimp. So what do we do after we get past this validation, right? Oh, the first thing would be to go to the MailChimp docs and figure this process out. Now, we subscribe members to lists or audiences, so we need to know, what our list options are. We need to be able to get this list ID. So then we need a way to find that list ID. Let's see, merge tags, lists. Okay, so here we go. Create a new list, read, get information about all lists. All right, perfect. That's what I need. So I just need to hit send a request to this location here. So I'm going to do this pretty simply. Just going to create a route for us to work with so we can kind of test some things out. So I'll call this test. And then I need to get to this lists URL. So what I'll do is HTTP, and I'll do a GET request. And we need that MailChimp domain. So like you saw over here, I have these URLs already set up that we had looked at before. So I can just do this MailChimp URL. and it has the ending slash, so that tells me I don't need that bit. So I can just do a get request to these lists. Then I'll go to this test URL, and that should give us our error. Oh, here we go. And let us know what we need to do. So we have this blank object that gets returned. We did not execute the curl request. And this is just a helper method that TypeRocket provides for making curl requests. If you're interested in that, it should be under docs, MVC, advanced. Try this again here. Well, I know I added it in here. Okay, maybe I added it somewhere else. HTTP fields. Well, regardless, I'll have to check on that. But essentially, there's an HTTP client that you can use to kind of make these requests. So we'll jump back in here, and then we'll see what MailChimp. There's no response. We're not authenticated, right? That's ultimately what we're being told, because we need to do that basic authentication with MailChimp. So basic authentication, if you remember from before, the username doesn't really matter. Again, username, password is what we need. So I'll just call this API. It could be anything. And MailChimp API key is what we want. Refresh this page. 302 lists. Now let's see what our issue is here. All right. So we're going to this list URL, US 19 lists, get all the lists is what we're supposed to be doing here. I'm just going to Google what the status code means. Alrighty. So then let's get back to developer here, get started, look back at what we've done wrong. If somebody knows in the chat, feel free to let me know what you think the issue is. MailChimp API, perhaps I have the wrong URL. Yes, I have admin in here, so that is the incorrect URL. Let me switch over to that config here. Admin. All right, refresh the page. Let's see, what was my URL? It's supposed to be MailChimp API. Okay. Alrighty. Back here, refresh the page. All right, there's our lists. So here's our subscription list, all the kind of stuff that we can do against it. But what we want is this ID, right? So we can add members. So now that I have that ID, I can go back to members. And now here's our list ID. So we just do a call to a post request to lists ID members. However, I would tell you that if you do this post creation process, if somebody tries to subscribe and they're already on your list, or if they want to resubscribe per se after unsubscribing, this post request won't work. So the best thing to do is actually do put requests to the MailChimp API. So we actually need this lists list ID members, and then we need a hash of this. Essentially, it's the email address of the person trying to subscribe. You first transform it lowercase, and then you MD5 hash that, and that'll allow you to look up the contact. And if that contact does not already exist, you can essentially provide if the stat, essentially if they're a new person, then you can set their status to whatever you want. So let's do some of this. I know that's a mouthful, so we'll get past that process. So let's do this public API. This will be kind of where we test things out. And that gives us our list. So maybe I'll just call this list moving forward. And in our subscribe, what we need is HTTP. We want put request. So that's what it asks for. The MailChimp URL. We want to do lists, the hash of the list, members. Is this correct? Scroll back up, members, yes, and then the email. So we'll call this hash. Now we need this hash variable. And the way we will do this is we need an MD5. Okay, and then we need to transform the string to lowercase. And then what we needed was the fields email. And we'll just say, hey, if that doesn't exist, give us, well, actually, we know it exists, so we're fine because we did the validation. So, yeah, so this will add a subscriber if we execute it. And we are also going to need to do that authentication, right? So doesn't matter, API, and the password will be our MailChimp API key. And then that will create our subscriber. We'll say thanks for subscribing. And just like that, we can connect MailChimp right into our TypeRocket email form. So again, we'll change this to lists, I think. No, it was just list. So we have access to that. Subscribe email. MailChimp at just.com. Subscribe. Okay, thanks for subscribing. Let's look at our audience. And we only have one. So apparently we need some sort of payload to go into our MailChimp API. And so as a part of this put request, we can also insert data. And as we mentioned before, MailChimp expects the payload to be JSON, so we can apply that as well. So the first thing that we'll do here is copy this out. Get our URL. Just kind of clean things up a bit. Then we need data. And we want this to be a JSON request. Okay. So here we will set up our data about our subscriber, and we'll jump back to the MailChimp docs and see what they say we need to do. All right, so email address is the required field. And we'll do fields email here. And then status if new. And if they're a new person, we want them to do double opt-in. And the way that we do that is we set them to pending. And that will essentially shoot off confirm your subscription type thing. And then this data gets transported into here. And then this true value here sets TypeRocket, MailChimp, it tells them that it's JSON. Okay. So let us try to resubscribe. Subscribe. Thanks for subscribing. Looks good. Refresh the page. We have double opt-in, so I'd have to check my email because I'm a new subscriber. So I actually want to bypass that because I do not plan to pull out my email. So let's do subscribed instead. Subscribed. Subscribe that person. And then here's our audience, refresh. And now we have 2 contacts. And there we go. Nicely set up and subscribed. Now, what if we wanted to tag this user? We talked about tags. We'd have to essentially do another request against this using the MailChimp tagging system. So member tags, you can look here, list, the member subscription, the tags. You can tag them this way. However, I have found, I believe, under segments, members, kind of the better way to do this. Well, segment ID members. We can just go about it over here, actually. Tags, member stub tags. Okay. So this will let us tag a member. Show properties. Okay, this is the right place. The name and the status. And we want the status to be active in order to place it on that user. So let's see what kind of request we need. We need a post request to a similar URL. So we'll just do post. And a similar URL in that it is members in the hash, but we just need to add on a little bit extra called tags. So that will take care of that for us. Subscriber hash ID is done. So this tags array is what we need next. This has gotten me stuck before. So just keep in mind that you actually need this tags setting here. And then we'll say this is newsletter. Whoops. Yeah. It's newsletter, but I believe we needed the name. And we need to pass the status of active. Okay. Then we'll just pass that tags data, send it as JSON, and then the next subscriber we have should have a tag. So we'll do Kevin. Subscribe that user. Took a little bit longer because we're making 2 API requests. Look at our subscriber list. Refresh the page. MailChimp user 3, and they have that newsletter tag. So there you have it. Now we have subscribers, but what about managing these subscribers or even managing a list or an audience behind the scenes in the WordPress admin? So I'm just going to show you a little bit of that. I'm just going to look at populating a form on the back end. Since we've already looked at how to do these routes and things, you could do that fairly easily with TypeRocket. But again, let's look at this from the standpoint of just populating a form with information. So we'll go to our functions page here. We want an admin page. We want the resource to be MailChimp. Okay, action. Let's have that be member. And the title can be MailChimp. Let's see what that gives us in the browser here. Go back to the admin. MailChimp. We don't have anything because we don't have a view set. Set the view. Let's see, well, it can be text block. Just dive into this thing and see what our options are. View. I do believe, well, we can jump over to the TypeRocket docs for this. I don't have everything memorized. So admin set a controller. Here we go. So we want to set the handler to be our particular controller. So let's do that. And that should help us get to where we want to go. MailChimp controller. Okay. And now we're going to map some actions. It makes sense to me. Let's just do this get request here. Map a get to, so map action, get request to admin on this thing. Okay. And then back in our MailChimp controller, kind of scroll to the top here. A view, and these views will get added under a different section. So MailChimp will actually be under this pages area. So we'll just call this MailChimp. Let's just do hi here. Go back to our admin. And there we go, hi. Now, we wanted a form. And so I think really the better way to do that is within this piece, because this, let's do a little bit more. So we'll create a form here. And then we want this form to have the contents of the MailChimp member list. So if I go back to MailChimp and members, we'll see the list of the members here. And what does the request body parameters, let's see, create. We just want to read. Okay. So we'll look those up, and I just want to see what our response looks like. So our response has this members array and an ID and email. So maybe we can look at that for a second. All right, so we'll just grab this code here. And this time we want to work with the response. So we'll work with the response body. It's MailChimp lists. And we want the members, so we actually just want all of this stuff here. And that can be our URL. It's get request, so all we need is the URL. Authenticate and get that response. And then as part of the response, we'll just return the body. And that's just the response, the body of the response there. This will give us a form. Compact form. And then on the MailChimp side of things, we can do form, repeater. Said we're going to get a members piece here, and then ID and email address. So set fields. Let's do text. ID. Email address. We need to echo this out. And then we're also going to do opening and close. This will open and close the form for us. A little bit different than what we had done before. Refresh this page. And here we go. Here's all of our subscribers in a repeater field. And so as you can see, you could easily kind of go in and manage different people from that API if you wanted to, and then connect it in a similar way that we would have doing the methods that we've already done. So you can kind of reuse what we've already learned to get where we want to go. And that's essentially getting the admin working for this MailChimp API. So you can see how you could create like a backend or something like that for MailChimp and create an admin system to where, if say you had a client who needed MailChimp integration, then you could use TypeRocket to kind of build that out, connect them to their own list, and then add the functionality that only they needed to see. So they wouldn't have like this clutter or bloat from another way of doing it. And then you also have that level of control that you want from the process, because if they need a feature, then you can just create it right away versus waiting for whoever's system to update and hoping that they had already had that set up. So, you could do this for lists, you could do this for the details of a list, that type of thing, and then send that request back from the form and just do all kinds of really cool stuff. You could build out your whole admin for MailChimp that way. Obviously, there's other concerns here that we have not covered, such as security. Again, you would want to lock down some of these routes. Obviously, this is not connected to anything but the backend, so you don't really have to worry about that so much in terms of security, because WordPress essentially handles that for you when you register a page. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. I know it's a lot, but it's kind of fun stuff in terms of what you can do with TypeRocket. And I'll jump back to this one more time just because I want to help you understand what's going on here. Essentially, when we get this response from MailChimp, it sends back a payload, and it includes an array which has a body. And that body gets transformed into, it's a JSON response body. And then this little client helper thing here says, hey, if this is JSON response, then convert it to an array. And then our form can accept an array. So we just pull in all the data from that response, and the form can use that to populate its fields, as we've seen here. And so all we did to do that was to grab the ID and email. We could do the unique ID address, email type, all that kind of stuff. And then we could use that to update a particular member if we wanted to, or do it in bulk. Obviously, you could do like bulk edits this way. But yeah, so that puts us at time. I hope this has been informative to you to look at a real example of how you might use TypeRocket and the post type system, along with the routing system and controllers and all that good stuff. Even a little bit of models in there, and validation and inline errors. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to hit me up in Slack. But I really do appreciate your time and you being here today and watching all the way through. So I hope this has been super helpful and can inform how you take on your next project with TypeRocket. Thanks.